A very good morning. Today we are going to present about wood science beyond building. There are four content which is climate science basic, life cycle analysis, invasive species and other environmental factor. So this is our member. The atmosphere theory which involve the carbon cycle is a very important part of life in the general and the entire planet. Carbon flows between each reservoir in an exchange called the carbon cycle, which has slow and fast components. This diagram of the fast component cycle shows the movement of carbon between land that increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere result in increased global temperature. The forest absorbs carbon dioxide and release oxygen as it grows. Mass timber refers to the process of using a large number of woods to replace concrete and steels. Mass timber is usually used to build large buildings and because of that it creates less carbon dioxide and other byproducts and pollution materials. Wood are capable of storing far more carbon and in the process actually creates less carbon dioxide. When wood is used and left in place, it works as a storage unit for the carbon that is found in so much of the woods. The carbon stored in the wood won't be released into the atmosphere and when it decays it slowly emits carbon. The importance of wood science for forests. One thing that forest does is maintain watershed. It filters the water in addition to giving off oxygen and filters air. It absorbs more carbon out of the air than it will mature forests. The most frequently used tool in forestry is shelter wood cutting, which involves leaving large trees and removing the undergrowth. The large trees that are left should have good form, will look well and be healthy. They will seek the nutrition of trees, and by doing so, it will help maintain the soil, which is better for tree growth. The process filters water and also lays the groundwork for future wood utilization. For the trade-offs, plant material where it is part of woody material is used to create fuel that can be used in place of gasoline and coal. It is so frequently utilized because it contains a large amount quality of energy in a relatively small package about the size of a gallon. The energy contained in the gallon of gasoline equal by the number of wood.
Life cycle analysis. What is wood life cycle analysis? Wood life cycle analysis is a method of measuring the environmental impact of building products over their whole life. Also, it is to identify, quantify, and assess the impact of the energy and material use and wasted released to the environment throughout the life of a building product. And how will the wood dispose of and what will it end up as? There are four steps of wood life cycle analysis. First, harvesting. Harvesting is a process of cutting down the trees in the forest. It involves of cutting and harvesting equipments and trucks. Second, manufacturing. Manufacturing is a process of the wood into raw products such as plywoods and veneers. Third, construction. Construction is a process of wood into end products such as furniture and papers. The fourth step is disposal or recycle. Usually, the woods that we recycle will be formed into new products by DIY. Also, used woods can be disposed. The method to dispose the used wood is grind or burn for fuel. Why wood life cycle analysis is important? It is important to balance all the environmental effects such as less water pollution, less uses of electricity, less fossil fuel use, and minimum transportation requirement.
Next, the topic is about invasive species. Invasive species is a species that exists outside of its native range and causes environmental harm. So basically it means anything, it can be animal, plant, insect, or disease that does not belong to the native environment. So these invasive species can be introduced intentionally or unintentionally to the native environment. There are some advantages and disadvantages of these invasive species. The invasive species can become beneficial at the native environment For example, there is an invasive tree in the US, such as islanter species. These trees have some beneficial aspects, such as fast growing and good properties of wood, which are important for the timber industry. The disadvantages is that the invasive species will lead to the elimination of native species. For example, invasive pests had greatly affected the native tree, which is the chestnut tree. So the population of this chestnut tree had been reduced because of the invasive pests. Examples of invasive pests are emerald ash borer, gypsy moth, and hemlock woolly aldehyde. Emerald ash borer is the invasive pest on ash trees. It will cause rapid decline and death of ash trees. Gypsy moth will cause damage on the infected trees, badly with defoliation. And hemlock woolly aldehyde is the invasive pest for the hemlock trees. It will cause death and decline of hemlock trees in the US. Next, these are the examples of invasive tree: rhododendron tree, ailanthus tree, and paulownia tree. In general, the growth of this invasive tree had affected the native environment. So when they present at the native environment, the damage caused by them were not as bad as they were at the non-native environment. So as we know, these invasive species will bring more harms than good. So we need to manage the invasive species so that the environment is not damaged by them. In my conclusion, we can try to manage these invasive species so that the native species in the native environment does not being affected.
I would like to present about other environmental factors which include land use, impact of supply and demand, and lastly is sustainable management factor. Under land use factor, the old tall trees such as poplar, oaks, and hickories were inactive woods where this kind of trees will be used by the farmer in a way to sustain it to maintain the supply of firewood. Besides, the farmer also will want the number of trees to build a new barn, but at the same time they also think of future generation where they may need lumber to build a new house rather than cutting all of the active woods. At some points, there will be a constant supply of products coming out of the woodlot.
So moving on to another environmental factors, impact of supply and demand. The impacts of supply and demand in a country with ample wood resources, it has led to many manufacturing wood-based product business. As society become more developed, all those manufacturers compete with high level cost manufacturing costs and taxes. Hence, most of them will move to low cost countries if they cannot compete with these increased expenses, and at the same time they start to import wood-based products to fulfill user demands. In spite of that, some countries in which mostly low-cost countries did not have environmental regulation, thus indirectly contributes to global deforestation problem.
Last but not least is sustainable management factors, which West Virginia has an ongoing forest management land owner where they can create some tax incentive. There are lots of sovereign pine plantation that can be used to create sustainable forests and has a very useful construction timber, but if there is no long-term reliable source of raw material, these industries are not going to survive for itself. On the other hand, in order to slow down the deforestation, West Virginia is actively returning some former farmland to produce forest land. There are four ways of maintaining supply of raw material. Firstly is increase the intensity of management. Secondly is by growing the tree faster and on more compact area as well as improve conversion technique from a log to the engineered wood product. And lastly is a shift to non-wood materials such as steel, concrete, and other things as well. This is the end of our group presentation. Thank you for your attention.